1 million people came to Britain in the year ending June 2023. That is 4 times the migration levels compared with 2019.
And since then, the Prime Minister has been on X, and he sent the following post: where the last government failed you, this one will not. They drove up immigration numbers. We will get them down. Well, Labour have promised to get those numbers down. Could slashing levels of immigration save Sir Keir Starmer's premiership? Let's get the views of one of my favourite journalists, the former political editor of LBC Radio, Theo Usherwood. Hi, Theo. How are you this evening?
Very good evening. Appreciate it.
Good to see you. Will Sir Keir Starmer seek to drastically reduce immigration?
I think he'd like to, but I don't think that he necessarily is prepared to go where Rishi Sunak...
Can I interrupt you, because the microphone's on the blink, which I know is very out of character for this place. And what I'll do is, in the meantime, I will just... Are you back in the room?
Should you hear me now?
What a pro. There you go. You can even control your own kit. No wonder you were so popular at LBC. So back to... Will Starmer try to reduce the numbers? Because
he will try to reduce the numbers. I just don't think he's going to be prepared to go where Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson were prepared to go in terms of... And we're talking about small... Let's separate it first in terms of small boats, but in terms of a deportation plan to Rwanda. So I think we're without addressing those pull factors to the UK, it's very difficult to see how he reduces those numbers. In actual fact, that plan around Rwanda had started to work. We had seen a reduction in the numbers since it was introduced. And of course, Keir Starmer on his second day in office decided to scrap that plan. And when he went to the G7 back in September, and he stood alongside Giorgia Meloni and the Italian Prime Minister, and she's looking at something similar, he said that he wasn't minded with Albania. He said he wasn't minded to go down that route, but was interested. And we know the government's interested in spending money or funding, supporting countries where migrants are travelling to the UK from. On the question of legal migration, if you look at the visa route, the government could tighten up the rules, and it has looked at, the last government looked at thresholds and also allowing dependents to come with those who have visas to this country. But that will have implications for business, it will have implications for the NHS, it will have implications particularly for universities as well, which rely heavily on overseas students coming to this country, and they pay, of course, much higher fees than UK students pay to be educated at higher education in this country. So he is under pressure. I think you're quite right to say he's under pressure to reduce migration levels, but it's also worth just remembering there are pressures from business, from the NHS, from those sectors that rely heavily on overseas workers in this country. And it was interesting when he said, when he gave that press conference, he said he wants to make it, make one of the stipulations of firms taking work, hiring workers from overseas. One of the stipulations he wants to introduce is that actually they have to train domestic workers. But what he didn't go, and he could have gone further on this, and he didn't, is he could have done a like-for-like policy, a one-for-one policy, and actually said if you take an overseas worker, you have to take a domestic worker. And he didn't go that far. And of course, the complaints from business, and we know this, is that actually they feel they get better trained workers from overseas, they feel they get cheaper labour from overseas, and they don't necessarily want to incur those extra costs of training people up.
Well, that's right. Big business are very happy with the current levels of status quo of legal net migration, and you mentioned the NHS, public services, social care, to mention just a few. I mean, it's my view that if Starmer got legal net migration to circa 100 or 200,000 a year, I think that would be a political win for him in 4 years' time. But as you say, that would be a painful process with implications for the country and the economy. But also, would his own party struggle with a leader that sought to bring down immigration to that level?
I think...
would they let him do it?
So let's just split it so we're clear on it. If you split it, I think the Rwanda plan, and this is why the Tories in part introduced it, was because they knew it would be a dividing line within his own party. I don't think he's going to be able to. He doesn't have the political capital within his own party to introduce such a scheme. If he were to introduce such a scheme, and I think if you look at what's happening, particularly in with the German elections coming up, we could see a right-wing party, the CDU, come into force there. Emmanuel Macron's going to be under pressure in a couple of years' time in that French presidential election. I think if Europe was to come up with a plan where they would introduce offshore processing, then he might be able to get away with it. But if he's to go it alone, I can't see that happening. I don't think he'll be allowed.
I'm with
I don't
you.
think his party will be allowed.
I don't think, essentially, the Labour movement will really let Keir Starmer have those drastic policies that would probably properly stop the boats. But what about that one lever that any Prime Minister does have control of? They can decide how many come in. They could make it 0 tomorrow if they so wish.
Yes.
So my question to you is, regarding the legal net migration, will the party support a Prime Minister that got numbers down to 100 or 200k a year?
No, I don't think they would, and I don't think.
So that's a political headache for him.
And I don't think businesses would support it. And we've already seen, the power of business, and of course there's a complete juxtaposition there, isn't there? Because actually, if you look at the fact that they're going to have to pay an extra £25 billion a year in additional national insurance contributions, that they're, angry about and the pressures that put on them. I don't think, and you heard the mood music from the CBI conference, a couple of weeks ago now, really furious with the approach that Keir Starmer had taken and Rachel Reeves had taken towards business. I don't think they'll be able to stomach it. The university sector, we know about the trouble that universities are in financially.
Some household name universities could fold.
Well, we
numbers
know,
drop
absolutely. I think, and without this, I think we're even going to see some universities merge because they're just not going to be able to pay for it.
With any luck, some of the woke ones will go down. Listen, let me ask you about 2029.
Yeah,
I know that's a long time from now, but you're always looking ahead and sort of just predicting how things are going to play out. Potentially, Keir Starmer faces a war on two fronts at the next election, doesn't he? A potentially rejuvenated Conservative Party who have got their act together, and an insurgent reform with a charismatic leader. Does it follow that Sir Keir Starmer shifts to the right in the years ahead?
He needs to, and I think one of the things that that's interesting about his speech on Thursday, and it's not going to include a target, by the way, on Netflix.
Is this the great reboot that we're looking forward to?
Yeah, these reboots take them with a pinch.
Has he bought? Can I ask you? Has he bought a new suit and new glasses?
Or somebody else bought it for him. I think. Well, they've committed not to doing that. But can he? In that speech, and he's going to be talking about a ruthless efficiency to the way that government is managed, and I think that there is a realisation. He's spent so many weeks abroad in the first 5 months. I think somebody's done a sum of it. He spent something like 15 days on a plane, whether it to be to the Commonwealth heads of government or.
That's a lot of orange juice and peanut.
From the fields of Kentucky to the fields of England, Buffalo Trace.
A relentless focus on delivering the changes. Now, of course, Reform UK under Nigel Farage, we've heard this weekend that they could be getting to the tune of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds from Elon Musk and X, and of course the potentially the platform of X to promote, and we saw the support and how effective that was with the presidential election and Donald Trump allowing the Republican candidate to in effect bypass the mainstream media and go straight to voters with podcasts like Joe Rogan or Sean Ryan. Incredibly effective, and I just think that the challenges ahead for Keir Starmer are so significant, and if you count the fact that at some point there is going to be, you would think, some sort of accommodation between Nigel Farage and the Tories before the next election. There has to be, because they're just eating each other's vote. I can't see.
Could those two big egos, those two big beasts of the jungle, Badenoch and Farage, live with each other in some kind of partnership?
I'm not sure they can, and I think
they're both big personalities.
I think the reticence from Nigel Farage's point of view is that he's seen what's happened to previous Conservative leaders, where they get swallowed up by the Conservative Party and then chewed out and spat out, and I think that's something that he'll be wanting to be very careful about. But if there is that accommodation and they manage to get the right in this country, manages to get its act together, then Keir Starmer's got real problems.
Most definitely. I know that Nigel Farage has got his eye on Labour votes at the next election. Briefly, if you can, At what point do we see Labour backbenchers on manoeuvres if the Prime Minister remains this unpopular? Because at the moment, his poll ratings are in the toilet, aren't they? I mean, he's less popular than Rishi Sunak, he's less popular than Donald Trump, and less popular than Nigel Farage.
And of course, he had been doing so well in the immediate aftermath of the election. He was something like plus 19, and now he's slipped back to minus 32. Just a word of caution: the mechanics of the Labour Party make regicide much more difficult than with the Conservative Party. So even if there's a challenge to Keir Starmer's leadership, he does retain the right to go up against the challenger in an election. We saw that with Jeremy Corbyn when Owen Smith challenged him back in 2016, and then Jeremy Corbyn prevailed. So you need to be very careful. Anybody who's going to move against Keir Starmer needs to be very careful. But I think you're right. There are many Labour MPs on the backbenches who are thinking, do I really want to be a one-term MP? Do I really want to serve for 5 years? And as we approach the next election, do they start thinking about whether somebody like Wes Streeting or the left start thinking about Angela Rayner? Would they be more popular? But I would just be cautious, because the mechanics of the Labour Party make an overthrowing of the Prime Minister much trickier than it is for the Conservative Party. We've all got used to the febrile, how febrile that is, but it's not the same for Labour.
The plot thickens. Theo, thank you for coming in. We'll catch up soon. My thanks to the former political editor of LBC, Theo Usherwood. Now, this weekend...